Oh, hi. Michael, how are you?
Hello.
Kimberly, how are you?
What's the topic today?
Hi, how are you? Come on in. Great. And I think, did you see Lenny Mervis out there? I guess she was.
No.
She's coming.
Coming.
Okay. Okay, great. We'll get started in a second. Okay, great. I think it's time to get started. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for braving the weather. And our topic tonight at the MARY HYTKEN DUMONT University here at ASBEE is Hakol Tzafui V'Arshut Netuna. I'll pass out some sheets here. It means predestination and free will. It's the famous question of if God knows His all-knowing and He knows the future, then how does that leave us with free will? Now that's a philosophical question. Is that typical of Pirkei Avos, of the ethics of the fathers, the chapters of major principles? Is that typical to deal with philosophical issues? Well, I like to say, usually, Haggadah, Pirkei Avos deals with philosophy with a small f. I'm joking. But it doesn't usually deal with high philosophy. In fact, there is a debate as to whether this philosophical problem of predetermination and foreknowledge versus free will, whether this indeed is what the Mishnah is talking about. But assuming that it is, then we can get into kind of a meaty topic. And when you're studying Gemara, that's called a sugya, a topic that you can sort of get your hands on. You can ask questions from different sources, and so in our attempt to recreate a Gemara, and more of a Talmudic commentary on Pirkei Avot, this, if indeed it's dealing with this topic, a topic gives us a way to deal with this as an issue, which we can then ask various Talmudic type questions. What about from this source? What about from that source? What does this rabbi say? What does the other rabbi say? And so hopefully we'll have some fun with it. This should be one of our most interesting sessions. Now, we're in chapter 3, Mishnah 15, and we're in the teachings of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, unlike other rabbis who usually get 3 things to say, or maybe 4, Rabbi Akiva, they give him 4 or 5 Mishnayos to say all kinds of different things. And one of them is this Mishnah. Who would like to read that for us? 3:15. Debbie?
All is foreseen, and the option is given. And with good is the world judged, and all is according to the deed.
So how many points do we have here?
Well, that everything is known as 1, and the option given is 2.
Yeah, that's hard to understand.
Huh?
All is foreseen, the option is given. That's not a paradox?
Right, so it seems to be a paradox. We're going to have some ways of looking at it in which it's not a paradox. It's talking about 2 different things. But generally speaking, most commentaries think that we're dealing with that paradox. That's what this Mishnah deals with, is the paradox of God knowing everything. So then if God knows, for instance, that tomorrow I'm going to do a terrible sin, then what choice do I have but to do that terrible sin? Because God knows it. So it seems to deal with that problem, but not necessarily, as we'll see in a moment. Then we have 2 other points, that the world is judged favorably or in a good way, and also that everything goes according to the majority of your deeds. I should say the majority. It's not my translation. The majority of your deeds, or according to how many deeds you have. Different ways of reading it. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Now we have what I call my Gemara-like commentary that I wrote in the Gemara style, in Talmudic style. So let's begin there. Debbie, you didn't get enough of a chance. Keep going.
What is meant by all is foreseen?
So first of all, let's not jump to any conclusions. What does it mean, all is foreseen? Does it mean that God foresees everything? Let's take a look.
Rashi said, whatever a person does in his inner chambers, it is all revealed to him.
Okay.
As meaning Hashem.
Hashem. So Rashi, as a non-philosopher, Rashi was not involved with Aristotle and Plato and those things that the Rambam and other Sephardic and Provençal rabbis were involved in. He says, we're not even talking about philosophy. We're just talking about God knows everything. Be careful with your deeds because God is aware of everything that you do, even in the Chadrei Chadarim, even in the room within a room. He knows all that goes on. Nothing to do with knowing the future. He sees everything. Safui, like Har HaTzofim, Mount Scopus, he scopes out everything, he can see everything. So that's what he's talking about. No philosophical problem at all. Now, while we're dealing with Rashi, let's just deal with a little bit of a Talmudic like a question. We have a question and answer about Rashi. Go ahead.
Rabbi Yecheskel Sarna, author of Delayot Yecheskel, head of Hebron Yeshiva.
You may have heard of the Hebron Yeshiva. There was a great massacre there in 1929. It was a Memphian who was killed, Schoenberg, and then they moved to Jerusalem. They still call themselves Hebron Yeshiva, but they moved elsewhere. Okay, go ahead.
He challenged the Mishnah. Did we not learn it once before? As we learned in the Mishnah above, Rabbi Judah, the prince, editor of the Mishnah, said, etc., and look at three things and you will not come to sin. Know what is above you, a seeing eye and a hearing ear, and all your deeds are written in the book.
Exclamation point, that's the question. Rebbe already said that what? That everything that you do is what?
Recorded.
Is recorded, it's what else? Seen, it's heard. So what do we need this Mishnah that says everything is foreseen? Now there's a little bit of a historical question here. Rebbe came second and Rabbi Akiva came first. So the question should really be reversed. What do you need Rebbe for? Because Rabbi Akiva already said. But the way the Mishnah is laid out, the chapter 2, Mishnah 1 said that all your deeds are known, heard and seen, written in a book. And then chapter 3, Mishnah 15 says again that everything is seen. So it seems redundant from that perspective. But in any event, why do you need both Mishnayos? Go ahead.
He answered, is that where I am? He answered
Yes.
that there it speaks of belief,
There, it speaks of belief.
and here it speaks of the obligation to take the option in your hand, as it says in Deuteronomy, and you should choose life, so that you and your children will live.
So he says, this Mishnah is not just telling you a philosophical point. Again, trying to get away from the philosophy. It's not that God knows everything, you have free will, and therefore this Mishnah establishes two important philosophical principles. Nonsense. Mishnah is not here to tell you about philosophy. It's telling you what to do. And what is it telling you? That you have the opportunity. And if you have an opportunity, that's not just a nicety or a statement. You know what that is? If you have an opportunity to do things, then what should you do? Grasp it, seize the moment and all that kind of thing. Carpe diem. And in other words, uvacharta b'chayim, you should choose life. Choose life, it's an obligation. This Mishnah is not talking about, the other Mishnah is talking that, is everything seen? Yes, is everything heard? Yes. Is it written somewhere? Yes, it is. That's a very interesting point. It's a factoid. This Mishnah tells you the option is given. Take the option, seize the option. Does that read well in the words? You think so? Okay. Well, you could argue that it says that the option is given, but it doesn't say what you should do. But you think it's more convincing that when it says the option is given, obviously you should take it. Okay, interesting.
But you could still make the wrong choice. The option is there, but it depends which.
Right, the Mishnah may seem more live and let live. It says, look, God knows what you're going to do, but you can do whatever you want. Right, it's live and let live. So maybe it's not the way Yecheskel Sarna sees it. Yecheskel Sarna is probably trying to give Musar. He's trying to admonish people, and he wants to use this Mishnah as an opportunity to admonish people, to take the opportunity, to seize it. Okay, moving along. So that was an interesting excursion. We were expecting to have a philosophical discussion. Here's Rashi says, nothing to do with philosophy. It's just the idea that God foresees things. Then we said, we have a Talmudic question. Why do you say this? Somebody already said it already. So the answer is that this is different from the other Mishnah, as we explained. Okay, now we're going to engage in another Talmudic exercise, which is to get to the root of things. You can't just state a Mishnah. Mishnayos tend to do that. They just say, this is the law. And the job of the Talmud and the Gemara is always to say, where did you get that from? What's your source? So we're going to get some sources. We already had a source, right, for the idea that the permission is given. So that would sort of be one source. We'll get back to that also. But let's take a look. Who would like to read that? Larissa?
All is foreseen. From where do we know this? Rabbeinu Yonah said, as it is written, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my down sitting and mine uprising. You understand my thought far off.
So I thought that was interesting. Psalm 139, it's not in our prayers. It's not a very well-known psalm. And a number of the commentaries, the Abarbanel has a whole essay about it. He quotes earlier rabbis. Everybody's really into this. That this is the source for this idea that of God knowing your comings and goings. Now, again, this is not necessarily so much in terms of future. You see, if we get into the philosophical problem is if God knows the future, how do I have a choice? This is more of a source for, like on the Rashi's scale, that this Mishnah says that God knows everything. Forget about the future, just everything in general. And this verse would be a good source for that. Go ahead.
The Gra, Rabbi Elijah of Vilna, said, "It is from Jeremiah. Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too wondrous for me?"
Right, now if you just left it like that, there's nothing too wondrous, therefore, what does that mean? There's nothing too wondrous means in the positive that I know everything. Right, but then again, that doesn't get into the question of foreknowledge or the future. It just means he knows a lot of stuff. Go ahead, but Rashi.
And Rashi explained that verse to mean, "Are any future things hidden from me?"
Aha, so the Vilna Gaon quoted that verse because he knows the Rashi takes that verse to mean, is anything hidden, meaning what would be hidden? Future is hidden. He says, no, the future is not hidden. So that would be a source for that idea that God knows the future. Go ahead. Then the other part of the Mishnah said the option is given. We have to analyze that. We have to know the source for that. Go ahead.
And from where we know this, the Rambam says, "This is a major principle, and it's a pillar of the Torah and the mitzvot, as it says, 'Behold, I have given before you today life and good, death and evil.'"
So that's what we mentioned before. We mentioned that verse before. Rabbi Sarna mentioned that. Okay, so that's the source for the idea that the option is given. The option is given. It's not an option. It's an obligation to take the correct option. Okay, good. Now, so if Rashi said that this Mishnah is not talking about foreknowledge, comes the Rambam and says it is talking about it. Let's see the Rambam. Who would like, Lenny, would you read that for us?
And the Rambam said, "This statement is worthy of Rabbi Akiva."
So it's interesting, right? Right. Rambam has favorites. How do we know the Rambam has favorite rabbis? Because, right, sometimes kids come from different groups and they say, "Oh, what's your favorite holiday? What's your favorite?" Right, and you think that's a silly question, but the Rambam has favorites. How do we know the Rambam has favorites? Because in his whole book, he doesn't mention names. He says, I'm rewriting the Talmud. We don't need to get into who said what. Even though the whole Talmud is about, no, did that rabbi say it? Is the other rabbi said it? He's very into that. He says, what difference does it make? Let's just get the laws down. But here and there, he mentions Rebbe, who wrote the Mishnah, a fellow we mentioned before, Rabbi Judah the Prince. He mentions Hillel and he mentions Rabbi Akiva. So here he says, oh, this is a real Mishnah. This is not just about preaching and ethics. This is about philosophy. So this is worthy of the great Rabbi Akiva who said this. Go ahead.
All is foreseen, all is known before him, may he be blessed. And the option is given. There is free choice, free will. Even though the Holy One, blessed be he, knows the future, this does not force a person to sin or do mitzvot.
Right. So here we have the paradox that Mr. Kramer pointed out, and that's how the Rambam reads the Mishnah. The Rabbi Akiva is pointing out the paradox between foreknowledge, God knows the future, and free will. That we can do whatever we want, even though God knows what we're going to do. Go ahead.
Rambam Tshuva 5:5 asks, if the Holy One, blessed be he, knows that a person will be righteous or wicked, is it not impossible for him not to be righteous or wicked according to the Creator's knowledge? Right? So the Rambam asked this question. So we're going to put it sort of in Talmudic terms that the Rambam asked a question as somebody in the Talmudic, base medrash in the house of study raises a question. So the Rambam raises this in his writings. Here we present it we don't say the Rambam, in this compilation I put together, I don't say someone wrote, Rashi wrote, Rambam wrote. I say they asked a question because that's how they do it in the Talmud. It's just a question. So he did ask a question. It was in writing, but it's a question. Go ahead. Rather, said the Rambam, his knowledge is not like ours, for he and his knowledge are one, and the mind of a person cannot fathom how he can know the future.
Okay. I don't fully understand this is a philosophical point, that whereas with us, we know certain stuff, that's sort of over here, and then there's us. And then I have that knowledge, the knowledge is outside of me. With God, God is everything, so his knowledge is not something that he acquires, because he doesn't lack anything. If he acquired knowledge, that would mean that he might still be missing some other piece of knowledge. But with him, there's no collection of knowledge that he has. All knowledge is all that great stuff in the world that's called knowledge. That's like the substance of the world. And he is that. He is knowledge. So it's not a distinction between God and knowledge. I'm saying these words, I don't fully understand it, but it's not so important for tonight's class. What's important is that he says, therefore, since his knowledge is different from our knowledge, in whatever kind of strange way that is, therefore, to say that if I know that you're going to Kroger tomorrow, then you're definitely going to Kroger, right? Or if I know that you went to Kroger, then you definitely did go to Kroger. So then if I could know the future that you will go to Kroger, then you have to go to Kroger. Yeah, but God's knowledge is different. How is it different? I don't know. Some philosophical thing that is part of him, it's not separate. But that means it's different. If it's different, so just because when you know something, then it has to be that way. If that book is blue, it is blue. But with God, he might know the book is blue, but the book could still be green. Tomorrow it could be green, right? So he doesn't fully answer the question. His basic answer is, his real answer is, how could you have foreknowledge and still have choice? You know what the answer is? We don't know. Because we don't understand God's knowledge. Because as it says in Isaiah, read on a little bit, rather. What are we up to?
For we know that the deeds of man lie
Yeah.
within.
Well, go ahead.
As it says in Isaiah 55:8, for my thoughts are not your thoughts.
We read on a fast day, "Ki lo machshavotay machshavotechem." My thoughts are not your thoughts. We have a proof, a philosophical proof from Isaiah, as if Isaiah is talking philosophy, that God's knowledge is different from our knowledge. So therefore, the ultimate answer is, we have no idea. Now, right?
12th century Pravans objected against the Rambam. You shouldn't raise questions and then not answer them.
See, Ravad is a very disrespectful commentary on the Rambam. He says a lot of things the Rambam said in his 14-volume book make no sense. And this is one of them. If you're going to raise a philosophical question that's going to pique people's interest and it's going to get them all excited, this is a topic we know. Students love to talk about this topic. So then you got to answer the question. And if you're not going to answer it, don't raise it. So how could you do this? It's terrible. Go ahead.
Rather, the knowledge of the Holy One, blessed be He, is like the knowledge of the astrologers, who know that it is in the future, but it is possible to escape the fate of the astrologers.
Yeah, I could rewrite that a little bit, but the point is that an astrologer knows tomorrow is going to be a bad day for you. But we believe that you could overcome that. We have this idea that Abraham overcame the various predictions about his future, that he wouldn't have children, etc., that you could overcome it. So you can know the future, but the truth is the Ravad himself says that he's still not sure what the real answer is. He thinks this might be some kind of an answer. So these are two classic answers that there could be a future, but you can escape that future. But now we run into a philosophical problem, right? Because if God today knows that future, so tomorrow you're going to be really nice to your mother. Now, so then you have no choice. Why should you even get credit for being nice to your mother? God knows you're going to be nice to your mother, so you're stuck being nice to your mother, so you shouldn't even get credit for being nice. But then we say, no, it's like the astrologers. That could be your destiny, but you could change your destiny. So you get there and you start yelling at your mother. So we say, wait a second, but yesterday he knew that you were going to be nice. So his knowledge was imperfect. So we're running into trouble.
What about the reverse, that it's, even though God knows that it's going to happen, it's still your choice, but he knows that's the choice that you're going to make?
Right, yeah, that seems to be the simplest answer. Right, he knows that's the choice you're going to make. Right, but then it would just seem that, right, it seems like you just give that answer and everyone will be happy. But the fact is that means that right now, from God's perspective, you have no choice. You have to be on the path that he knows. So, right, you could say he just happens to know. Yeah, we're going to get to an answer like that later. That allows God to be passive, is a passive knowledge, is not an active knowledge. We'll get to that later. All right, who would like to continue? Thank you.
That would have to be a
Yes.
passive knowledge rather than an active knowledge if we do have free will.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
In other words, if
He's not making it happen. He just knows it's happening.
you could have a choice, and Hashem would know what's going to happen if you make that choice, and He'll know what's going to happen if you make that choice. But the choice itself is up to you.
Well, that would be you're suggesting another solution, which is that God sees sort of a map of all the possible options, and then you pick one. But that would mean that his knowledge is imperfect. He needs to know now what that's going to be tomorrow. Unless the future is unknowable, right? I mean, that's always a problem. Can there be anything that God doesn't know? But you could say that future is, that it's just, it's, right.
What will happen with whatever choice you make.
But that's only options. That means he doesn't know which one. Right. It's good that he has it all mapped out. But if you asked him a question, God, do you know which one he's going to pick? If he says no.
But if it was his decision to give you that free will, then he can still be God because he's given you the choice.
Well,
And
okay, so now Debbie's suggesting something else. Debbie's suggesting that let's forget omniscience and foreknowledge. Let's just assume that the main principle is you get free will. And as long as God does it, so that he's happy with it, so we're fine. But if, as a philosopher, we insist that God has full omniscience and knows everything, then we're stuck because you've sacrificed one for the other. The Barbanel says, oh, there are all these terrible philosophers. Some sacrifice free will, and they say, oh, there's no free will, there's only foreknowledge. Some sacrifice foreknowledge, and they say, oh, there's only free will. He says, we have to stick with both principles. So, but these are, you're doing well. Yeah.
he's God, so he can do it however. He can pull back. What is the Hasidic?
Right. Tzimtzum.
To leave room for us
You're
to
suggesting,
be
right.
imperfect. That's how bad things
But what does the question is, does it make him imperfect, which would violate the principle that God is perfect? Right? Does it make him imperfect to not know, to leave so much space for you that he doesn't know what's happening tomorrow? So, and then what does it do with all these prophecies where God does say what's happening tomorrow? And what do you do with verses where God says, you will sin? I know that after Moses dies, you will sin. What do we do with that? Did the people of the book of Judges have a choice but to sin since it was prophesied? So we've got lots of problems. Yes?
Your example of going to Kroger tomorrow.
Right.
Something may happen. You have a flat tire, the
Right.
car doesn't start,
Right.
somebody gets sick. So
Right.
you really don't know for sure that you're going to Kroger.
Well, I assume that God does know.
God.
That's the problem. I assume that God should know. Right. But, when I know, right, my knowledge is imperfect. Right. All I can know is that you said you're going to go tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. But the fact that you went to Kroger yesterday, that seems like absolute knowledge, and there's no way of changing that. So you can't go back yesterday and, right, it's absolute. So that we want to assume that the future works that way too. If you know you're going to Kroger tomorrow, then you know it, and there's no way out of it. You can't go to Schnucks. There's no other choice. Okay, let's continue. Let's see, Lineage. How about Sally?
And Rabbi Yom Tov Lippman Heller said, it makes sense, like the Rambam said, for we say in the Midrash Rabbah Breshit, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, it is hard to say it, and it cannot be explained by a mouth. It, the death of Abel at the hands of Cain,
So which means this is not something we're so philosophically comfortable saying, but we've got to say it. The truth is, we've got to mention it. What's this uncomfortable truth? Go ahead.
It, the death of Abel at the hands of Cain, is compared to two athletes, wrestlers.
So believe it or not, in the Midrash, which is probably edited, this particular Midrash is probably edited in the 8th, 9th century, 7th, it says atlitin. If you look in the middle of the second line in Hebrew, atlitin, which it's the same as the root for the English word of athletes. So it actually uses that word. Go ahead.
Who were standing and wrestling in front of the king. If the king wished, he could separate.
Right, you could stop the gladiator fight. You say, I don't want to see any blood today. Let's call it a draw. Go home. Go ahead.
If he didn't want to separate them, one fellow outdid his fellow and killed him. And he would scream and say, let the judgment be exacted from the king.
Now, by the way, it's not clear, but who says, let the judgment be exacted from the king?
I have no idea. I'm glad you brought that up.
Right?
Well, who wants a judgment?
The king.
People watching.
So I thought originally that it was the murderer, the murderer, the one who get the KO, who ended up killing the other fellow, that he would say, oh, look, now you want to arrest me for murder? Let the king get the judgment because He could have stopped it. But I think based on the comparison to Cain, it's the other way. The blood of the fellow who died calls out and says, let the king pay for it. Mm-hmm. And that's what Cain did. When Cain's blood cries out, as the rabbi said, it's not pleasant to say it, but that's what it means. The blood is crying out, not against Cain, against God. Mm-hmm. So now we get into a whole theodicy, right? Then we get into the problem of, if God knew the Holocaust would have happened, then he let the Holocaust happen. We get into that whole question. We weren't even trying to get in there, but we're there, right? So this philosophical problem relates to that philosophical problem of, why is there evil in the world? How does God allow it? But the fact is, God's like the king at the gladiator fight, and sometimes he doesn't stop it. We can't explain it. We don't know it. It's hard to say it. If it wasn't written, we wouldn't say it, but that's what it means. According to this midrash, that's what it means. So too,
it says, the voice of the blood of your brother is screaming out that it is God's fault.
Right, radical interpretation. Usually we say, the voice of your brother's blood is screaming out to you, Cain, that you killed him, right? But no, it's calling out to God. So
we see that even though all is foreseen, and it is difficult to say it, there are cases in which the Holy One, blessed be He, does not prevent a person from doing bad, even though it raises questions.
The Ravid objected. He said, Rambam, don't raise questions if you can't answer them. What did the Midrash do? It raised a question. Did it give an answer? No, it says that's a problem that we can't speak about, but it's you got to say the truth. It's there. It's a problem. So Rabbi Yom Tov Lippman Haller said, well, we see from here that it's traditional to raise some questions that even if we can't answer them, there are sometimes, we're not this kind of yeshiva where we have all the answers to all the questions. There are things we can't answer, we don't have answers to, and that's Judaism, and that's the way it is. All right, let's go on. Who would like to continue? Mr. Kramer, would you like to read? Rabbi Moshe?
Rabbi Moshe
Alman Tznino.
In the 16th, said, his knowledge is not like ours.
Just one point. You may be annoyed. Why do I keep mentioning what century they're from? Part of our goal in this document is to create a dialogue of the generations. That you should feel like it's a rabbi from Spain, from Provence, from this century, from that, from Hebron, from contemporaries, from Salonika, and you should feel like in the Talmud where you have about 4 generations, 6 generations arguing together. So too, in this document, you should feel like sometimes people just know, oh, that rabbi is from this century, this rabbi. But I put it out right here for you, try to be somewhat consistent, so that I didn't write it every single time they appear, but to give you that feeling of the dialogue of generations. Go ahead.
His knowledge is not like ours. For him there is not future, only all is present.
There's, I guess, no future, right?
So his knowledge does not force anything. Just as a person's knowledge of seeing a running man doesn't force him to run.
Okay, now, right? I know that Jason is standing over there, right? Now, that doesn't force Jason to stand. He was standing there anyway. So I'm not forcing it because in the present, nothing that we see forces it to be that way, right? I see the Mona Lisa, it doesn't force the Mona Lisa to be the Mona Lisa. It's just something that we all understand that has no relation to forcing anything. So too for God, since the future is in the present, with God there's no past, future, there's no time. We'll talk about what that means later, different ways of looking at that. Therefore, it's really in the present. So just like my knowing that Jason's staying there doesn't cause that, for God, his knowing that I'm going to, be nice to my mother tomorrow, doesn't cause me to be nice to my mother. It's just a fact. He just knows that that's happening right now. He just knows it, and it's not causing it tomorrow. It's today. And so, some suggest that he's a Maimonidean philosopher. He's also based on Aristotle, in which there's no time for God, and that really he's answering within the Rambam. That this is presented here as something different than the Rambam, but it could be that that's what the Rambam meant when he said that he's different than us. How is he different? Because for him, there's no time. Okay. So there's no such thing as future. All right. Go ahead.
It is precise in the words, for it says it is seen in the past, for with him all is as if it is in the past.
If indeed this Mishnah is talking about the paradox, right? So it should have said all is, well, and my translation is not good according to this. It should have said all is foreseen, like this translation says, but it really says all was seen. Safui, everything was seen. Everything was seen. We're talking about the future. According to Rashi, everything was seen, meaning anything you do, it's always seen. But according to, if this Mishnah is indeed talking about this lofty philosophical problem, then it should say everything is foreseen in the future. Everything will be seen. But the Mishnah says everything was seen. So we see from the words, as the Talmud often says, it's precise in the words. It works out well in the words. It's not just the theory we have. It actually works in the words. It's nice when it actually works in the words, right? It works out because that's what it says. Because for God, the future is the past. Okay.
The Maharai said that it says it is foreseen, and it doesn't say seen.
It uses a strange word. You know the word Mount Scopus, Har HaTzofim. It's a place where you see. It's not the simple word of ro'eh, to see. It's a special word called sofeh. What's the difference?
Because foreseen implies that he wants to see, and it says in Habakkuk, and to look carefully at iniquity you cannot.
So Habakkuk says God does not like to look at what? Iniquity. So therefore, the Maharal says, it uses a different word like, he sort of sees it from afar, but he doesn't really want to look too carefully, right? If God looks at all the stuff that he sees, I'm sure he doesn't want to look too carefully at everything he sees. So he just looks at it very passively. He's aware of it, but whatever that means, he looks at it very much in a cursory kind of way. Now again, does that compromise his knowledge? But whatever that means, we're looking at it in anthropomorphic terms. He looks at it, with his nose closed and his arm's distance. He doesn't want to get to, so he claims that Maharal claims that's why it uses that expression, not because God has no future or past. Okay.
The Yavet said, foreseen implies from afar, that he knows before it happens.
Now one second. Okay. So the Yavet says, foreseen means from afar. It's before it happens. Does he agree with Rabbi Amansanino that God has no time? Again, the Yavet said, Yosef Chassid is a fellow from exile from Portugal. He said that foreseen means, sofeh means it's from afar, that he knows it before it happens. Does he agree with Rabbi Amansanino? That God has no time? For God, there's no future or present or past.
I think we're opening another paradox because clearly I think everybody would agree that there's prophecy, and from a certain perspective, humans, he knows the future before it happens. But at the same time, he probably might still hold the view that it's all present for Hashem. But for people, it seems like there's a time.
Okay, that could be, right. But I didn't see him saying that, right. It seems to me, that's a reasonable possibility, but it seems to me that he's not working with this assumption that for God everything is present. He's talking about things from afar. God sees from afar. He sees off into the future. You're right, he might see it now, and therefore it's the same. Could be. I want to suggest that the Yavetz is talking about, is assuming, as some other commentaries seem to assume, that God does function with the future. Everything's not in the present. So I want to work with that assumption. But even though I might be wrong, I emailed two philosophy professor friends of mine, and I wasn't able to get an absolutely clear answer as to whether there is a debate among philosophers as to whether everything is in the present for God. But I got close to it, and we're going to get to it in a moment. Here's another way of taking the Yavetz's statement in a way that gets back to Sally's point. What was your theory again?
That we do have choice. God just knows what choice we're going to be making.
Right. Seems like a simple solution. God, there are different choices, different paths, and he knows which one we're going to take. No, I mean, it seems to cut through everything. It seems fine. So this relates to something I once heard. I couldn't locate it. I don't know whether it was from a Jewish source or a non-Jewish source, but you could take this idea of the Yavetz and apply it to this famous idea. I'm looking out my 20th floor apartment view, and I see across the valley is a train coming from the right and another train coming from the left. I happen to know that there's only one track. So given the speed that they're going at, I realize there's going to be a crash. I don't have a walkie-talkie. I don't have a 911. I'm not the air traffic controller. So I have no control over the fact there's going to be a crash. But I know with absolute certainty, because they're going around the bend and they can't see each other, I know there's going to be a crash in a moment. Did I control that crash? No. So using the Yavetz's idea that Hakol Tzafui means that everything's seen from afar, maybe he's saying that it's all at arm's distance, that he's aware of it, like Sally says, but he didn't cause it. Is that sort of like what you're saying?
Right.
Right. So it's an elegant, it might be a modern solution, I don't recall. I have to research it further. But if you come up with it, let me know. But it's a solution, and it could stem from that word. If we assume the word Safui means far away, like Mount Scopus, you see from far away. Does Scopus imply that? Does it I don't know. But in any event, Sopheh might mean someone, Sophim, or sort of scouts. Scouts tend to be looking far away. In any event, maybe that gives us a solution. Now we're going to get a little deeper into the philosophical part, and so I view this as like a sugya. Now we're going to kind of take apart this question as to whether God sees everything's in the present, or whether there's a future. Let's move on. Whose turn? Michael?
Sure. What are they, Yavetz and Rabbi
Alman Sanino,
arguing about? Yavetz holds that the Creator knows the distant future. Rabbi Alman Sanino holds that there is no past, present, or future with the Holy One, blessed be He. The sages of the Hasidus say that the Holy One, blessed be He, is outside the framework of time. The Rambam and the students, in the footsteps of Aristotle, hold that there is no past or future. And the Holy One, blessed is He.
regarding the Holy One.
Regarding the Holy One, blessed is He.
Right. So here you have it. You have different views. I'm not sure about the Yavetz, but it could be that he holds that there is such a thing as a distant future. According to the Yavetz, there is such a thing as a distant future. God does not live in all three tenses at the same time. Mount Sanino says that God does live in all tenses, which is the same as the Rambam, which is based on Aristotle, that there's no past, future, or present with God. But in Hasidus, it's not because there's no past and present, it's because he's outside. Time is a human thing, and he's outside of it. That's how they describe it. Okay, moving along.
Among the wise men of the nations of the world, Plantinga, 1986, believes
Plantinga
believes that whatever happens tomorrow, that is what God, who is by definition omniscient, knew would happen in the past.
Okay, and this is a clever answer by a modern non-Jewish scholar. I thank Shalom Karmi for pointing this out to me. So he says, let's say you go to God today and you say, well, what's Finkelstein going to do tomorrow? Oh, he's going to be really nice to his mom. So then you go to him tomorrow and you say, hey, he was really not mean to his mom. God forbid. So you say, what happened? So no. Now, God knows in the past that I'm going to be mean to my mom. Instead of changing, until now we thought the future could change. Maybe what happens is the past changes. Since God is omniscient, then we know that whatever is chosen tomorrow, that becomes what he must have known yesterday, because there's a principle here that God is omniscient, so he knows everything. So if included in that must be future things, right? We're assuming that when we say God knows all, that includes the future. So we must assume that yesterday he knew what I was going to do today. But that could change. You just keep changing the past. What he knew yesterday changes based on what I do today. So it's a very clever solution. Whether this would be acceptable in our world is an interesting question. But anyway, let's come in here. So now, when we have a debate flying around, we need to look at different sources. And do the sources sound like those who say that God has no time, or the sources who say that God knows the future? There is a future, and he's able to look into it. So let's see what the sources say. We're going to investigate by looking at different sources. Go ahead, come in here.
Come and hear a proof, for we say in Rosh Hashanah, and Rabbi Yitzchak said, we only judge a man according to that moment, as it says in Genesis 21:17, for God has heard the lad where he is now.
Okay, the famous story of Ishmael, that he was crying to God, and God knew that Ishmael was going to become a wild man and give a hard time to a lot of people. But he said, fine, now he's calling out to God, we'll hear his prayer, we'll save his life according to where he is now. So we have to figure out, does that sound more like that God knows no future, or the future is the present? What do you think? So let's see what the text says. Go ahead.
Okay. According to the Yavetz, the Holy One, blessed be He, knows the future, but ignores it.
He's aware that there's something called the future, and he is aware of it, but he ignores it. Go ahead.
According to Rabbi Alman Snino, all times are in the present for God, but He still judges according to the present.
Right. He judges according to our present, even though for him, even the future is present. Go ahead.
Rabbi Meir Simcha of Tvint said in Or Smeach Teshuvah, chapter 5, let us come and hear proof from Yoma. Rabbi Haya Bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, a righteous man does not pass away in this world until another is created like him, as it says in Ecclesiastes 1:5. And the sun rises and the sun sets until the son of Eli set, the son of Shmuel rose.
Right. So we know that there's always another Jewish leader, right? That you lose Rabbi Feinstein and then you get somebody else. There's always a Jewish leader in every generation. So when Eli died, all of a sudden there's Shmuel. Just as his sun was setting, his sun was rising. Now, what's the problem with this philosophically? God always makes sure that when one dies, the other one comes up. What's the problem with this? How does this relate to our problem?
He's controlling outcomes, it seems.
Yeah. He's controlling what? And specifically, what is he controlling here?
The number of wise men.
Right.
The fact that there is always a wise man.
Right. I think, let's say I'm Rabbi Salvation, right? So, wow, I came in this generation and I saved this generation. No, you didn't. God planted you here because we lost the previous generation. So why would you get credit for it? Go ahead. And Rabbi?
And Rabbi Haya Bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the Holy One, blessed is He, saw that there were few righteous, so He stood and planted them in each generation, as it says in 1 Shmuel 2:8, for the foundations of the earth are the Lord's, on them He has set the world.
So that's the Talmud in Yoma. Go ahead.
Let us say that the righteous must be righteous, in parentheses, that they are forced to be so.
Right. So it seems from here that the righteous have no choice. These righteous people have no choice but to be righteous. Page 4.
Rather, said Rabbi Meir Simcha, it is perhaps like the Rambam said in Teshuvah 6:5, that he does not decree on this or that tzaddik that he must be a tzaddik, rather on a certain number who must be righteous, and it is everyone's choice whether or not to be among that group.
Right. Right. Now the problem is, the Ravid says, we'll see later. We'll see later. The Ravid asks a question on this theory, but we'll get to that later. Now, Rabbi Shalom Karmi suggested the following, and I believe I got it right. He was very cryptic, but I think the next paragraph, it's not fully fleshed out, it's not written like a Talmud, but it's an interesting little aside. Let me just read it. This could be a debate, this idea as to whether the future is in the present, could be a debate between the Rambam and Rashi as to whether a person who swears not to eat something, I'm not going to eat fish tomorrow, and then he does eat it, is he an invalid witness because he lied? You see, when I said I wasn't going to eat the fish, was that a lie? I said I was going to eat the fish, but I didn't eat the fish. So when I said I was going to eat the fish, was I a liar? No. Why not?
Because you may really have intended to.
Intention. What else?
Hashem had you in His power.
Right. It could be. Right. It could be my intention. My intention was good. That's one possibility. And even if I intended to do otherwise tomorrow, is it a lie? Now, I'm going to eat fish tomorrow. It's not a lie yet. So the question is, does the future relate to the present? You see? So those rabbis who say that if it's not true now, then you're lying now. So they would say if God doesn't have absolute omniscience about tomorrow now, then he doesn't have knowledge. The other people say, no, as long as he doesn't have to know tomorrow. Today, if he says today that that he's going to honor your mother tomorrow, so that's still true today. It's not true. It's not false yet. It'll be false tomorrow. And tomorrow maybe we could use whatever his name was, Plankton's trick, and we could reverse what he knew yesterday. Anyway, so that's a very complicated thing. Let's move on. Yes, Kimberly, would you like to read?
I'll go ahead and read for him.
Okay.
The Rambam challenges the notion of free will. Is there not Pharaoh? Is there not Pharaoh about whom the Holy One, blessed is He, said, "I will harden the heart of Pharaoh"?
Right. So that's a famous problem. How does he have free will? God hardened his heart. Go ahead.
And did not the Holy One, blessed be He, decree that the Egyptians enslave Israel? So how were they punished for this?
Right.
The Rambam said, if any one Egyptian wanted to not enslave, they were not obliged to enslave. And in the end, the Holy One, blessed be He, prevented them from doing teshuvah because of their wickedness.
So he's got two answers. One is what? That although the Egyptians had to enslave us, but
Not each man.
not particularly right. Pharaoh had free choice. It could have been Pharaoh's son, Pharaoh's mother-in-law, Pharaoh's brother-in-law. It didn't have to be Pharaoh. And then also at some point, yes, God did take away their free will, but every now and then you could lose your free will if you're really wicked. So once first they had free will, then they were wicked, then God took away the free will. But the Ravad.
The Ravad challenged the Rambam, but those who do enslave are fulfilling the will of their Creator.
See, that wicked, if God knows there's going to be a certain number of wicked people, he puts a wicked person in this generation, or God knows there's going to be a certain number of righteous people. So it's true. You say, why did our salvation get credit? Because it could have been anybody. It happened to be him. But no, there had to be somebody. So the prosecutor could say, don't give him any credit. It had to be somebody, and he's just fulfilling that. So when God says you're going to, the literal word is you're going to prostitute yourselves. So then some Jews prostituted themselves. So that prostitute could say that he's fulfilling God's will. So that's the problem. Rather,
said the Ravad, the enslavers were surely worthy of the punishment, since we bring obligation on those who deserve it.
Continue.
As we learned in the Braisa of the Mechilta of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in chapter 21:13, and he who did not premeditate, and God brought it to his hands.
It's a cryptic verse. If someone murdered somebody and they didn't premeditate it, but God made it happen. What? God made it happen that you killed somebody? Yes. Why?
We bring about merit through the meritorious, and obligation through one who is already obligated.
Let's say there's a fellow named Reuven, and God wants to bump him off. So who's he going to use? Shimon? Shimon's just a nice guy. Why should he get stuck having blood on his hands? But Levi, he's terrible. Let's use him. So now Levi, not only is Levi a miserable guy, but now Levi's going to have blood on his hands. Perfect. He deserves it. He already, half murdered 3 other people. So we'll make him murder this guy by mistake or whatever. So there is a notion that those who are evil get to do the evil deed. So the Egyptians must have been evil. So that's why they were evil. And therefore they were punished. You say, wait a second, but they had no choice. They had to do God's will. Yeah, but they got that job because of previous evil that they had done. So this is the Ravad solution. Okay.
And furthermore, the Egyptians made the Jews work too much, more than they had to.
Right, so there's another point, which is, yes, you had to enslave them, but they enslaved them too much, so that ruins everything. Same problem with the Gentiles in general, right? The Gentiles in general were in exile. We're supposed to be in exile. We're supposed to suffer in exile. But we always say the Gentiles got carried away with the exile, and therefore we hold that against them. Okay, moving along. Now, so that's really the end of our philosophical discussion. If anybody has to go now, that'll be a good time to go if you're scared about the rain. But just 8:20, we have some more minutes. Now what we wanted to do was, there are some other interpretations of this Mishnah. Let's take a look. And there's another piece we didn't explain. Remember, there are 4 parts to the Mishnah. We didn't explain all 4 parts. So let's take a look. Go ahead.
Okay. Rabbeinu Yonah of Gaona, Catalonia.
Notice, by the way, he came from Catalonia. Many great rabbis, Ramban, Rashba, the Ritva, they all came from Catalonia. And right now, Catalonia is breaking away. They want to be Catalonia again. Well, as medieval Jewish historians, it's so exciting. It's coming back to life again. It's great. Okay, go ahead.
In the 13th century, he said, "You cannot explain it, how God can have foreknowledge and give us free will, for it is a wonder."
Right. So, after all the philosophers, Rabbeinu Yonah was not a philosopher, and he said, we can't explain this. So it's just a wonder. So that's going back to the non-philosophical school. Go ahead.
And so Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman held that Rabbi Akiva did not come to explain, but to obscure.
So the Mishnah there tells you what questions you shouldn't ask. So sometimes we have to tease people and tell them, here's a question, you can't answer it. And so too, the Rabbeinu Yonah said, this Mishnah doesn't answer any questions. We didn't learn anything tonight. We're just laying out a problem, and it's a problem, and it's a mystery, right? Now, again, the philosophers were trying to work on it, but there's this other, more simple school that says it's just a paradox. We don't get it. That's all there is to it. Let's give someone else a chance. Sally, you want to read again? Rabbi Shmuel.
Rabbi Shmuel de
Uzeda. Uzeda.
Uzeda said, all is foreseen by man, as it says in
there's a new idea. What? Not all is foreseen by God, but all is foreseen by man. Go ahead.
Behold, I have placed before you today life and the good, death and the bad. And there is no excuse for the day of judgment to say, I did not know that I had a choice.
Hey, where are you? Let's see. No, you sound good. Let's see. But I got lost myself. What page are you on? Page 4. 5? Page
4.
5. Yeah, there you go. Yes. Okay, so so what did he say there? That
there's no excuse for the day of judgment to say I did not know.
Right. You know your choice. So all is foreseen. And you have a choice, so you can't say you had no choice. You have a choice. So it's just a totally different reading of the Mishnah. Nothing to do with foreknowledge. It's just talking about the human choice. Interesting. Here's another. The Rashbat's a fascinating way of looking at things. Complicated theology. Go ahead, the Rashbat's.
Okay, the Rashbat said.
He's in Algeria, right? There were Jews in Algeria. Let's see. Right, we have the Menashe Bracha. He comes from Libya, but there's some from Algeria. Go ahead.
Interesting. All is foreseen and the option is given if it will be for good or for bad. As we said in Sanhedrin, Bathsheba was worthy to be for David, but he ate an unripe fig.
That's a Middle Eastern metaphor.
Right. If he had waited, she would have come to him permissibly.
Right. So here's an interesting way of looking at life. You're gonna land out, in that chair over there. But whether you land out there in a good way or a bad way, that's up to you. So, in other words, it was predetermined that Bathsheba would be a wife to David. And they were gonna have Solomon, and Solomon was gonna save the world. But whether he get there in a good way or bad way was up to him. He got there the wrong way. So it's an interesting way of looking at foreknowledge and free choice. So David has free choice. He gets there the wrong way. There was foreknowledge, but it didn't determine the path. He could have taken the good path. Of course, it still begs the question, was he going to go there on the good path or on the bad path? But anyway, it's a clever attempt to dodge this whole discussion. The next...
Saying that, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That the foreseeing is that it's going to happen. Whether it will happen in a good way or bad way is what's left.
We're left for the human choice.
Okay.
Yes. So that's fascinating. Right. It's a very passive thing. You sort of wait around. If you see something you want, so you might say, well, it's either destined for me or not. If it is, I don't have to steal it. It'll come to me. In any event, now Rabbi Soloveitchik, just while we're talking about sort of past and future and playing around with past and future and what was that, Plankton or whatever his name was, so Rabbi Soloveitchik has an interesting idea. Just sort of relates to it. I saw someone mention it in this connection. let's take a look. Tell me if you think it relates. Go ahead. Debbie, you want to read that for us?
Starting
Rabbi Joseph.
Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik and his man of halacha said, when a man does teshuvah, the future and present rule over the past, and the sins become errors. As we learned in Yoma, Moshe said to the Holy One, blessed be He, Master of the universe, when the Israelites sin before you and do teshuvah, make their intentional sins be like mistakes.
So we've been talking about how for God there's no future. It's all right now. For Jews, there's no past. We can erase the past. So anyway, it's just an interesting parallel. It's not exactly related to what we're talking about. Now we have another problem. Problem is the Mishnah, if indeed this great philosophical Mishnah that deals with the lofty question, we're only worthy of Rabbi Akiva, because again, according to Maimonides, if you're anything, you've got to be a philosopher. That's a first line of defense. If you're a prophet, and you have to be a philosopher. So he's so happy to hear that Rabbi Akiva was not just a rabbi, he was also a philosopher. He's very excited. But then the rest of the Mishnah seems to get back to, kind of ho-hum stuff. The world is judged nicely, and it all goes according to how many deeds you have, or goes according to the majority of your deeds. That doesn't seem to relate to this big philosophical problem we had. So we've got to figure out how it relates. So, let's see. Larissa?
And with good, the world is judged. What is he saying? Rabbi Vadya Bartanura said, this is what it means. Since the permission was given, the world is judged in goodness.
In other words, go ahead.
For the Holy One, blessed be He, does not force man to do bad or good.
What would it be like if the world was judged not in goodness? Then, if it wasn't in goodness, then you would what?
We wouldn't be here.
No. You wouldn't have a choice.
Be a flood.
You wouldn't have a choice. You wouldn't have a choice. You wouldn't get any credit for good things, right? So that this very philosophical point. That's why the Mishnah says it's such a good world, because you're not forced. You get credit for stuff, right? That's why it makes it a good world. Okay, go ahead.
The Maharal said, since people are given an option, you might think it's out of a sense of something. Feed the wicked and let him die. So it comes to tell us the world is judged in goodness.
There's an expression which Ray Greenblatt likes to use this expression sometimes. The wicked person, let's say he's drinking from the wrong waters. So you say, let him drink, let him stew in his own juices. So you might have thought that if God gives you an option, oh great, God gives everybody an option. Right? I don't know about you, if people in this room have an option, fine. But He gives Saddam Hussein an option, he gives Gaddafi an option, he gives Assad an option, and he gives Putin an option. And that's terrible. So the world is judged in an awful way. So therefore the Mishnah comes and says, no, somehow it's still in goodness. It's okay. We're going to be all right. It's good because when millions of us do good things, we get rewarded for it. It's good. It's still goodness. Go ahead.
Yahweh said, since all is foreseen, and the Holy One, blessed be He, knows the greatness of your evil inclination, therefore the world is judged in goodness. I.e., the Holy One, blessed be He, weighs the magnitude of the evil inclination in the judgment of man. What does it mean? And all is according to...
One second. Stop there.
Okay.
So you have free will, but He knows that your free will is limited. Because this guy, and this is an interesting idea, this guy has a really bad evil inclination. This one fellow, not so much of an evil inclination. So or circumstances lead to more of an evil inclination. So depending on your circumstance, therefore, even though you have free will, but God judges based on your circumstance. I'm not sure exactly where it fits in the words, but it's an interesting idea. Go ahead. And now what about the final phrase, the fourth phrase in the Mishnah? It says, and according to the majority of your deeds, or the plentitude of your deeds, you are judged. Go ahead. What does it mean?
Rabbi Yonah said, lest you say that since the world is judged with goodness, it is not according to your deeds. It comes and teaches me otherwise.
1 second. Right. If the world is judging goodness, it's like, the teacher's a lenient guy. He's going to give me a break. Everything's great. There's a worry about exactly how many mitzvot I've got. He says, no. It goes according to how many deeds you have. So it may be, so it's not, this doesn't answer the question of how it relates to the original statement, but it relates, the third statement that the world's is judging goodness needs a corrective of the fourth statement to say that it still goes according to how many deeds. And the Sforno.
And the Sforno said, you might have thought that man is judged according to his belief in the divine providence, since all is foreseen.
So you see, Sforno is going back to the first statement. The first statement says there's all kinds of philosophies. There's the idea of omniscience and the idea of free will. So these are the important things. I believe with all my faith in free will, and I believe in all my faith in omniscience. So you might think that's the important thing in life, is to believe in different things. Go ahead.
But it comes to tell me otherwise, that it is all according to one's actions and not only one's beliefs.
Right, I mean, it's not that belief is not important, but actions are the most important. So, so now we've understood the philosophical way of looking at the Mishnah, the non-philosophical way of looking at the Mishnah. We understood all four statements within the Mishnah, how they may or may not relate to the philosophical point, and then finally one last point. Lenny, you want to finish up for us?
Maral said, what does all is foreseen have to do with the previous Mishnah of man is beloved because he is made in the image of God?
Because we have to understand that in order to literarily analyze this passage, we looked at the relationship of the first sentence with the second sentence. That was our main discussion. Then we looked at the relationship of the second and third sentence. But now we want to know, how does it relate to the previous passage, which we didn't study tonight. But the previous passage, Rabbi Akiva says something else. Another very important point, which we'll get to next week, when we talk about the important significance of the human being and relating to everyone as being significant and important. So the previous statement was that how beloved man is because we are created, man, woman, created in the image of God. So how beloved we are. So he talked about the image of God. What has the image of God got to do with this Mishnah? Is there a relationship between the previous Mishnah and this Mishnah? Go ahead.
Maral said, because he was created in the image, he is worthy of being supervised by God and worthy of free will.
The two main points of this Mishnah, that God knows everything that goes on, like Rashi said, and that we have free will. What does that stem from? Image of God. The image of God. So that these points is, in other words, it's not just a philosophical thing that we have free will. That free will is an incredible product of our being in the image of God. It's an amazing thing. That God cares about everything we do. That's only worthy of people who are in the image of God, who are worthy of God thinking about them or knowing about what they did. So it's interesting to know that some philosophers actually, in an effort to deal with different philosophical problems, they actually say, no, God only knows about in general what a person does. He doesn't get into the detail. And again, Abarbanel sort of takes them to task for minimizing God's knowledge. But in any event, we saw tonight a Mishnah which could be seen as just part of the ho-hum Mishnayos, saying that God knows everything and you should be careful about your deeds and things like that. Or no, it's dealing with a hot button philosophical problem. Even though Rabbi Akiva was not among the philosophical school, he wasn't a philosopher in that sort of sense. He wasn't a Greek type. But he was aware of this paradox and he laid it out, and here it is right here in this Mishnah. Others said no, that it's not that complicated, just nice simple statements, and each statement stands on its own more. But there's some relationship between all the various statements. Then we talked about the question of the relationship of the future to God. Is the future something sort of out there, in which case we have this problem of, if God already knows what you're doing, in the intervening time, how do I have any free will? Or is there no such thing as the future according to the way God thinks? And these are two different ways of looking at it. We said that maybe there may have certain legal implications about oaths and things like that. We had this interesting suggestion from this modern philosopher about how maybe it's not the future that changes, but maybe you could change the past to work out with God's knowledge of the future. In any event, I hope that you appreciated that we took a simple Mishnah and we created a Gemara out of it. We created a whole discussion of asking questions, looking at different interpretations of it, examining different questions that came up about it, and I hope you appreciate that what we've done is we've created a whole new text, a whole new dialogue about the Mishnah, and I hope you enjoyed it. Yes?
Image of God, how about the evil people like Hitler,
Right.
murderers?
Yeah, so
It's the image of God.
philosophers I've heard talk about it, talked about the idea that Hitler had that saying that the human being has the image of God means that we have potential for the image of God.
Oh.
So we could say with certainty that since Hitler was human, he had the potential for the image of God. But he abused it, and therefore, when he died, he did not have the image of God. That you could lose it. You could lose it. But not everyone agrees with that, but that's, I think it's a good way of looking at it. It's a privilege that you have, but you could lose it. Other questions? Okay, great. Well, stay out of the rough weather. Hope your electricity stays on, and thanks for joining us. So next week will be our final session, and the official title of our topic is "The Value of Every Individual." Very, very a key point, and we'll look at a number of Mishnayos that deal with this question, and we'll see what we can learn from it. Thank you.